There comes a moment in every believer's life when God calls you out of the familiar. He doesn't always give you details. He doesn't always give you a timeline. He just says, go. And in that moment, you'll feel the tension between what you know and what he's calling you to, between your comfort and your calling, between your fear and your faith. It's easy to say we trust God when the path is clear, but real trust, real raw faith happens when everything inside of you is trembling and yet your spirit whispers, I'm going anyway. Because sometimes God doesn't explain the whole story. He just wants to see if you're bold enough to take the first step. You see, some of us have been praying for a breakthrough, but we're still standing still. We've been asking God for open doors, but we haven't taken the keys of obedience in our hands. We want confirmation when God already gave instruction. Faith is not waiting for everything to make sense. It's stepping into what doesn't. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he didn't walk because the sea was calm. He walked because he trusted who was calling him. And that's what I came to tell you today. Stop waiting for the conditions to be perfect. No, the storm won't always stop, but God's hand will always catch you if you fall. Sometimes the miracle isn't on the shore, it's in the stepping. You'll never see what God can do until you dare to move with what little you have. You don't need all the answers. You don't need everyone's approval. You just need to believe that if God said, go, then the ground will appear beneath your feet as you walk. Faith will always feel risky. It'll always feel like leaving something behind because it is. You'll have to leave fear, leave doubt, leave that version of yourself that only survives in comfort. Faith demands transformation. Faith demands motion. And yes, you may fail. Yes, you may fall. But even that fall will teach you that his grace was never dependent on your perfection. It was anchored in his promise. The same God who called you is the same God who will sustain you. So this is your moment, that idea you've been too afraid to start, that healing you've been scared to face, that calling you keep running from. Step into it. Boldly, fearfully, faithfully, because God is waiting on the other side of your obedience. You've cried long enough. You've doubted long enough. You've played small long enough. This is not the season to shrink. This is the season to step. And as you step, heaven will shift. As you move, God will multiply. As you walk, the water will hold you. You don't need to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. And when you do, you'll realize it was never about the step. It was always about trusting the one who called you to take it. Faith doesn't make sense. It makes moves. You see, faith is never logical. It doesn't fit inside the framework of human understanding. It doesn't wait for the numbers to align, for the people to agree, or for the doors to open before moving. Faith moves first, and then the doors respond. Faith steps out before there's a path. It walks while the world watches and whispers. That doesn't make sense. And that's the beauty of it. Faith isn't supposed to make sense to the natural mind because it belongs to the supernatural. When God calls you to do something, he rarely gives you the full blueprint. He gives you a word, a whisper, nudge in your spirit, and expects you to move. That's how heaven operates. Faith isn't built in clarity. It's built in courage. Some of the greatest blessings you will ever experience will come on the other side of confusion, uncertainty, and risk. You can't calculate faith. You have to feel it. You have to believe that even when you can't trace God's hand, you can still trust his heart. Sometimes faith looks foolish. It looks like starting the business with no investors, going back to school with no funds, forgiving the person who broke you, or believing again after heartbreak. It's that still quiet, yes, inside of you that keeps whispering, even when everyone around you says, wait, because faith refuses to stay still in the presence of fear. It refuses to let what's visible define what's possible. Faith is movement. It's motion wrapped in trust. It's the decision to say, God, I don't know how this will work, but I believe you're already there. Because when you move in faith, you're not walking toward uncertainty. You're walking towards him. Every step you take in obedience is a declaration that says, I believe in a God who doesn't need my understanding to perform his miracle. And here's what's powerful. Every time you move in faith, heaven moves with you. Mountains shift. Doors unlock, chains break. God responds to motion. You've been praying, fasting, crying for a breakthrough. But God is saying, I'm waiting on you to take the first step. Faith doesn't wait for the path to be clear. It walks through the fog, believing light will show up when it's needed. When you walk by faith, you won't always feel brave. Sometimes your legs will tremble. Your voice will shake. Your heart will doubt. But that's okay. Faith was never about the absence of fear. It's about the decision to move in spite of it. Because the truth is, faith doesn't always look strong. Sometimes it looks like just showing up. It looks like taking the next small step when you're exhausted and confused. Faith doesn't make sense because it's not supposed to. It's designed to stretch you beyond logic and into dependence. It's meant to shift your trust from your plan to his promise. And when you finally take that step, you'll realize what faith has been trying to show you all along, that miracles are not found in explanations, they're found in movement. God will never ask you to step where his presence cannot reach. That's the beauty of divine instruction. It may stretch you, it may scare you, it may even break you down to tears, but it will never lead you somewhere his hand cannot protect you. When God calls you into something new, he already went ahead of you. He already walked the path you fear to take. He already arranged the help, the strength, and the grace you'll need when you get there. You're not stepping into uncertainty. You're stepping into a place that's already covered by his presence. So many of us hesitate to move because we want reassurance. We want God to explain the how, to show us the map, to promise us that it will be easy. But God's presence is the promise. When he said, I will never leave you nor forsake you, he was giving you something better than comfort. He was giving you himself. Because if you have his presence, you have protection. If you have his presence, you have provision, you have peace in the middle of confusion and strength in the middle of fear. When God tells you to go, he's not throwing you into chaos. He's inviting you into trust. He's saying, do you believe that I am enough for you in every place, in every season, in every situation? Because his presence doesn't just go before you, it surrounds you. It covers the past, it guards the present, and it prepares the future. That's why even when the path feels dark, there's a light that never leaves. That's his presence reminding you that you are never walking alone. Sometimes we treat God's call like a test of our strength, but it's really a test of our dependence. He wants to see if you can trust that his presence is greater than your fear. You may not know how the bills will be paid, how the healing will come, or how the door will open. But if God sent you, then his power will sustain you. You don't have to understand everything when you walk with the one who understands everything. And maybe that's where faith becomes real. Not when everything works out, but when you walk through uncertainty with a steady heart, because you know who's walking beside you. Even if you lose people, even if plans fail, even if your heart breaks along the way, his presence will not depart from you. You can't outrun it. You can't fall too far from it. And you can't be disqualified from it. So don't be afraid to move just because you can't see the outcome. God is already in your tomorrow. He's already in the place you fear to go. Before you ever take a step, his presence has gone ahead to prepare the way. And that's what makes faith possible. You don't have to walk perfectly. You just have to walk as with him. Because wherever he leads, his presence will always meet you there. You can't walk on water while clinging to the boat. You can't experience the power of faith while holding on to the comfort of safety. The boat represents everything that feels familiar. Your habits, your fears, your excuses, your need for control. It's the place where you tell yourself, at least here, I know what to expect. But faith doesn't live in the predictable. Faith lives out on the waves, where the wind is strong and the outcome is uncertain. That's where God waits for you, calling your name, asking, will you trust me enough to let go? Many of us are praying for miracles while still holding tight to the things that keep us safe. We want to see God move, but we don't want to release what makes us comfortable. We want to walk on water, but we're still gripping the edges of fear, doubt, and control. The truth is, you can't have both. You can't step into the supernatural while your heart is anchored in the natural. You can't grow while you refuse to move. The moment Peter let go of the boat, he did something no one else in history had done. He walked on what was supposed to drown him. And that's exactly what happens when you choose faith over fear. Letting go of the boat is never easy. It means surrendering the illusion of safety. It means saying, God, I don't know how this will end, but I trust that you're in it. It's in that surrender that the impossible becomes possible. Because miracles don't happen in the shallow end. They happen when you step out far enough that only God can keep you standing. That's where you realize your faith was never about you. It was about his power working through your weakness. Sometimes God will shake your boat just to see if you're willing to step out. He'll make you uncomfortable in the very places you used to feel secure. He'll stir the waters until you realize that staying still isn't safe anymore. And when that happens, don't fight the shaking. Follow it. Because the discomfort isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's God saying, it's time to walk by faith and not by sight. The boat will always represent what's easy, what's known, what's manageable. But faith is wild. Faith is messy. Faith is walking into the storm with nothing but a word from God and believing that word is enough to hold you. You don't need proof, you need courage. You don't need a guarantee, you need trust. And the moment you finally release your grip on that boat, you'll discover that the water beneath you has always been waiting for your step of faith. So stop asking God to show you the miracle while you're still clinging to safety. Let go. Step out. The same hand that called you will catch you. The same voice that said, come, will calm the waves. And when you finally dare to walk, you'll realize the miracle was never about walking on water. It was about trusting the one who could hold you above it. Comfort zones are silent cages. Faith breaks them open. The danger of a comfort zone is that it feels safe, but it's secretly suffocating your growth. It's that invisible place where you stop dreaming because dreaming feels risky. It's where you tell yourself, I'm fine, when deep down you know there's more. Comfort zones don't always look like fear. Sometimes they look like peace. But it's a false peace, the kind that comes from control, not from trust. And as long as you stay there, you'll never see what God can truly do with your life. God didn't design you to live small or stay stuck. He didn't place his power inside you so you could settle for predictability. The comfort zone is a counterfeit form of security. It promises stability but steals purpose. You can't carry divine destiny in a life that never stretches. Every time God calls you forward, he calls you out of what's easy. That's why growth feels uncomfortable. It's supposed to. The discomfort is a sign that you're expanding, that something inside you is awakening, that you're breaking out of the shell of who you were into the strength of who you're becoming. Faith will always challenge your comfort because faith thrives in movement. You can't walk into a new season while clinging to the old one. You can't ask for transformation but refuse transition. Some of us are praying for God to elevate us, but elevation requires release. You can't rise if you're still anchored to the ground, and sometimes that ground is made of comfort, old habits, familiar people, or a lifestyle that no longer fits the person God is shaping you into. The comfort zone whispers, stay here, it's safe. But faith whispers back, step out. There's more, and every time you choose faith, you break another bar off that invisible cage. You start to breathe differently. You start to see possibilities where you used to see limits. You start to experience what it means to live, not just exist, because faith is not about surviving. It's about stepping into the fullness of what God has planned for you. Even Jesus didn't operate from comfort. Every miracle, every teaching, every moment of his ministry pulled him out of safety and into sacrifice. If he had stayed in comfort, the world would still be lost. That means the same is true for us. Somebody's waiting on the other side of our obedience. Someone's deliverance, healing, or hope may depend on us stepping out of what feels safe and into what feels uncertain. It's not that God wants to make you uncomfortable just for the sake of it. He shakes your comfort zone because he knows what's inside you is too powerful to stay confined. You have to be stretched to be strong. You have to be challenged to be changed. So don't fear the stretching, embrace it. When you finally break out of that cage of comfort, you'll discover that freedom doesn't come from safety. It comes from faith. And once faith breaks you open, you'll never want to go back. The unknown is not your enemy. It's your next chapter waiting for obedience. Too often we treat uncertainty like a threat, something to run from, something to fear. But what if the unknown isn't a dark place meant to destroy you? What if it's a sacred space where God is waiting to reveal himself in a new way? The unknown is not a punishment. It's an invitation. It's God saying, will you trust me when you can't see the road? Will you follow me when all you have is my word? Because that's where faith becomes real, not in the clarity, but in the mystery. Every person who ever did something extraordinary with God had to face the unknown. Abraham had to leave his home with no destination. Moses had to stand before the sea with no bridge. Mary had to believe that what was growing inside her came from heaven, not from logic. The unknown has always been God's favorite stage. It's where he writes stories that human understanding could never imagine. It's where miracles are born. But to experience it, you have to be willing to walk through the fog without demanding all the details. The truth is, we fear the unknown because it strips us of control. We can't predict what will happen, and that makes us feel vulnerable. But faith and control can't coexist. God doesn't reveal every step because he wants us to depend on him for direction. He wants our ears to stay sensitive to his voice, our hearts open to his leading. The unknown teaches us to trust his character when his plan is unclear. It reminds us that faith isn't built on explanations, it's built on relationship. Sometimes the unknown feels lonely. It feels like losing the map, the people, and the rhythm you once knew. But that's because God is creating space for something new to grow. He's pulling you away from distractions so that you can hear him clearly. He's silencing the noise of what was so you can receive the revelation of what's coming. And though it may feel like loss, it's actually preparation. The unknown is the hallway between who you were and who you're becoming. You can't rush it. You have to walk it out with trust. When you stop fearing the unknown, you start seeing it differently. You begin to understand that every step you take, even when uncertain, is a step closer to destiny. You realize that uncertainty doesn't mean absence. It means alignment. Because when you can't see the path, you start to see his presence more clearly. That's how faith works. It's not about knowing what's next, it's about knowing who's leading. So don't run from the unknown. Don't shrink back when the plan looks blurry. Lift your head and walk boldly into it. Because the same God who led you out will lead you through. The unknown is not the end. It's the beginning of everything God promised you. And when you look back one day, you'll see that what once terrified you was actually the doorway to your destiny. Fear disguises itself as logic, but faith sounds like surrender. Fear will whisper to you in a voice that sounds reasonable. It will say, be careful. Wait a little longer. You're not ready yet. It will dress itself up as wisdom. No, but its real goal is to paralyze you. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it speaks softly, convincing you to play it safe. It tells you that staying where you are is smarter than risking everything on something unseen. But that's the trap. Fear uses logic to keep you small. While faith asks you to trust what doesn't make sense, faith doesn't argue, it obeys. It doesn't calculate, it believes. Where fear wants to analyze, faith wants to act. Fear demands a plan, faith rests in a promise. And sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is choose faith when fear gives you every logical reason to stay still. Because fear will always sound smart. It will sound practical, protective, even holy. But it's still fear. It's still the enemy of destiny. God didn't design you to live according to what feels safe. He designed you to live according to what he said. When God calls you, he doesn't need your logic. He needs your yes. Your surrender is what gives him access to move through you. Because when you surrender, you're saying, God, I don't need to understand how you'll do it. I just trust that you will. Surrender is not weakness. It's the purest form of strength. It's where you release control and allow God to take the lead. It's where miracles happen, not because you force them, but because you allowed God's will to flow freely through your obedience. Fear will always give you evidence of why you can't. It will show you your failures, your past, your lack of resources. It will convince you that you're not qualified. But faith focuses on who called you, not what you have. Faith remembers that if God chose you, then he already accounted for your flaws. He already saw your weakness and still said, that's why surrender is so powerful. It shifts the responsibility from your strength to his. Sometimes you have to silence the voice of logic to hear the whisper of faith. Because logic will always say, wait until you're sure. But faith says, move, because God said so. Logic will tell you to have a backup plan, but faith says, God is my plan. And when you surrender, you stop wrestling for control. You stop trying to make things make sense. You stop trying to manage outcomes that only heaven can handle. Fear may come knocking, but it doesn't get to stay. Every time you surrender, you remind the enemy that you're not walking by sight, you're walking by trust. You're not depending on your understanding, you're depending on God's power. Fear sounds like control, but faith sounds like freedom. And when you finally surrender, you'll realize that logic can build walls, but faith builds bridges, and those bridges lead straight into your purpose. God honors movement, not hesitation. Too many people are waiting for God to show them a sign before they move, but heaven is waiting for them to take a step. Faith is not about having all the answers. It's about showing up with what little you know and trusting that God will fill in the rest. You can't stay in neutral and expect divine acceleration. God doesn't steer parked cars. He guides moving ones. When you move even in uncertainty, heaven aligns things that would have stayed still had you waited. Hesitation feels safe, but it delays destiny. It's the voice that says, maybe later, when God is saying, no, it's the internal tug of war between what you feel and what you fear. You keep waiting for perfect timing, but perfection was never the requirement. Obedience was. Every time you hesitate, you lose momentum. Every time you overthink, you delay a miracle. Because hesitation is the enemy of breakthrough. God doesn't need your perfection. He needs your participation. The Bible is filled with people who moved before they understood. Noah built the ark before a single drop of rain fell. Abraham walked away from his home without knowing the destination. The woman with the issue of blood pressed through the crowd even when society told her not to. They didn't wait for confirmation. Their movement was their confirmation. And because they moved, heaven responded. That's the power of motion. It activates miracles. You might be praying for a change, but prayer without movement is like planting seeds and never watering them. Faith requires action. It's when you take that step into the unknown that God breathes on your obedience. When Peter stepped out of the boat, no, it wasn't the water that held him. It was his faith in the word calm. God didn't calm the storm before Peter stepped. He calmed Peter's heart in the middle of it. The same applies to you. Don't wait for the perfect condition. Trust that if God told you to go, the storm can't stop you. Movement doesn't mean you won't be afraid. It means you're choosing trust over fear. It means you believe that God's hand will guide you even if your feet tremble. The enemy loves hesitation because it keeps you stuck in potential. You can have vision, gifts, and dreams, but if you never move, they'll never manifest. Movement is how you show heaven that you're ready. It's how you say, God, I may not have much, I'm giving you my yes. Sometimes all God needs is your first step. You take the step and he parts the sea. You move forward and he moves mountains. The miracle isn't waiting on heaven, it's waiting on you. So stop analyzing, stop doubting, stop holding back. God honors movement. Even if you don't know where you're going, go anyway. Because the moment you move, heaven starts rearranging things in your favor. And that's when purpose begins to unfold right before your eyes. When you step, heaven responds. Every act of faith sends a signal to heaven that says, I trust you. It's not the size of your step that matters. It's the heart behind it. God moves when you move because faith and action are deeply connected. You can pray for a miracle. You can fast. You can cry out for change. But until you take that step, nothing shifts. The spiritual world responds to motion. It's like heaven is waiting for your yes to release what's already prepared for you. When you take a step in faith, you set divine alignment into motion. God is not moved by emotion. He's moved by faith. Tears don't always change things. Trust does. When you step out in faith, it's as if you're telling God, I believe you enough to risk everything on your word. And heaven loves that kind of boldness. The moment your feet hit the path of obedience, move, resources begin to flow, and doors you didn't even know existed begin to open. It's not magic. It's manifestation of trust. Faith is the currency of heaven. And when you use it, things begin to shift that logic could never touch. You might not see immediate results, but don't mistake silence for absence. When you take a step, something happens in the unseen. God starts orchestrating what you can't yet perceive. Your step tells him you're ready for what he's been holding back until you believed enough to move. Sometimes heaven is waiting on your movement because miracles are released in motion. Remember the lepers in scripture? They were healed there as they went, not before, not after, as they moved. That's the pattern of faith. The response comes in the walking, not the waiting. Stepping out in faith doesn't always feel powerful. Sometimes it feels unsure and uncomfortable. You might feel like your step is too small to matter. But to God, every step counts. Every step says, I'm choosing trust over fear. Every step says, I believe you more than I believe my circumstance. Heaven doesn't need your perfection. It needs your participation. The step itself is your yes, and your yes moves mountains. So many people are standing at the edge of opportunity, praying for a sign, when the sign is the stirring they already feel inside. God is saying, move. I know, and I'll meet you there. The response doesn't come before obedience. It comes because of obedience. You'll never know what heaven was ready to release until you step into it. You can't outgive God and trust. The moment you move, he multiplies. Every great shift in your life begins with one act of faith. That business idea, that new season, that leap of healing, all of it starts with a step. Heaven has been ready. The question is, are you? Because the moment you finally move, the atmosphere will change, the doors will open, and everything that's been waiting for your obedience will finally begin to unfold. When you step, heaven always responds. You don't need the whole plan, just the first step. That's the essence of faith. God doesn't hand you a full blueprint because he wants you to depend on his voice, not your vision. If he showed you the whole picture, fix it or rush it. So instead, he gives you a single instruction, one word, one direction, one next move, and waits to see if you'll trust him enough to act on it. Faith isn't about knowing everything in advance. It's about moving with what you know right now. We often get stuck because we want clarity before we commit. We want God to show us the outcome before we take the first step. But that's not how faith works. The first step is the seed, and the revelation grows as you walk. Every step you take reveals more of the path. God doesn't show you everything at once because he's not just trying to get you to the destination. He's shaping your heart along the way. The process is what prepares you for the promise. Sometimes you have to start walking in the dark with nothing but a whisper from God. And yes, it's scary. It's uncomfortable not to know how things will unfold. But faith isn't comfortable, it's courageous. The first step is always the hardest because it requires you to leave control behind. It demands that you silence the voice of fear that says, what if it doesn't work? And replace it with the voice of faith that says, what if it does? You can't wait until you feel ready because readiness doesn't come before obedience. It comes through obedience. Think about it. Noah didn't wait for rain clouds before building the ark. He started with a word. Abraham didn't wait for a map before leaving his home. He started with a promise. The woman with the issue of blood didn't wait for an invitation. She started with a touch. Each of them took a step without a plan, and heaven honored it. That's how God works. You step, he shows. You move, he reveals. You trust, he provides. The beauty of the first step is that it unlocks divine movement. When you do your part, God does his. But he won't move for you. He moves with you. He's not going to part the Red Sea until you stretch out your staff. He's not going to open the door until you reach for the handle. Some breakthroughs are waiting on your motion. The plan will unfold as you walk. So stop waiting for everything to make sense. Stop waiting for confirmation from people who didn't hear what God told you. Take the step, even if it's small, even if it's quiet, even if you're trembling. The first step might not take you where you want to go, but it will move you closer to where God needs you to be. Trust that the same God who gave you the vision will guide your every move. You don't need the full plan, just enough faith to take the first step. Every act of faith unlocks a new revelation of who God is. Each time you step out in trust, you discover a part of his character that can't be learned through comfort. Faith is the lens that reveals the depth of God's power, love, and faithfulness. You can read about him, hear about him, even sing about him, but there are dimensions of his nature you'll never know until you walk through uncertainty with him. Faith doesn't just move mountains. It moves the veil between what you know about God and what you experience of him. When you move in faith, you begin to see that God isn't just a provider. He's your sustainer. He's not just a healer, he's your peace in the storm. You start to learn that he doesn't only open doors, sometimes he builds new ones. Every season of faith is a classroom where God reveals himself through your obedience. The moment you trust him beyond logic, he shows up in ways that defy logic. Faith is how heaven introduces you to sides of God you didn't even know existed. There's a revelation reserved for every risk you take in obedience. When Abraham lifted the knife to sacrifice Isaac, he discovered God as Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. When Moses lifted his staff at the sea, he discovered God as the deliverer. When Daniel refused to bow, he discovered God as the protector in the lion's den. None of them would have known those sides of God had they not moved in faith. You can't encounter God's power while standing still in fear. Each leap of trust unlocks another layer of divine reality. Faith invites you into a relationship that's alive. It pulls you closer. It makes you realize that God isn't distant. He's deeply involved in every step you take. When you move in faith, you stop knowing him only through words and start knowing him through wonders. It's in that space between uncertainty and obedience where he whispers, "See, I told you I'd never leave you." The truth is, faith is not just about getting results. It's about getting revelation. God uses your faith to draw you closer to his heart. When you walk through seasons where nothing makes sense, but you choose to trust anyway, you begin to understand that his faithfulness isn't tied to your comfort. It's constant, unshakable, and deeply personal. You begin to see that even your delays have divine purpose, that even your pain has instruction, that even your waiting has worth. Every time you take a step of faith, heaven opens another curtain and you see more of him, more of his grace, more of his strength, more of his mercy. Faith is the key that keeps unlocking the mysteries of God's goodness. And once you experience him in that way, you'll never want to go back to playing it safe. Because when you live by faith, you don't just see miracles. You see God himself moving in ways that remind you that he is everything he promised to be and more. When you boldly step out in faith, you give God something to work with. Heaven moves when earth believes. God doesn't need your perfection. He needs your participation. He's not waiting for you to have it all figured out. He's waiting for you to trust that he already has. Faith isn't about being fearless. It's about moving even while fear whispers in your ear. It's standing on water when logic says you'll sink. It's building the ark when there's no sign of rain. It's walking around the wall even when it hasn't cracked yet. That's what faith looks like. It's obedience without evidence. So many of us want God to show us the full picture before we take the first step. But God says, take the step and I'll show you the picture. He reveals direction in motion, not in hesitation. The miracle doesn't happen while you're waiting for proof. It happens while you're walking in trust. Faith opens doors that fear keeps locked. When you step out, you activate divine movement. God begins to align resources, people, and opportunities you could have never orchestrated on your own. Sometimes the reason you haven't seen God move isn't because he's silent. It's because he's waiting for your movement. You've been praying for open doors. But faith is the key that turns the handle. You've been asking God to part the waters, but the staff won't stretch itself. Faith requires your motion before it reveals God's miracle. You don't get to see the full staircase. You just climb the first step, trusting that each next one will appear under your feet. And yes, faith will stretch you. It'll push you into spaces that feel uncomfortable. But remember, growth is never birthed in comfort. It's birthed in courage. When you step out, your dependency shifts from your ability to his authority. You start realizing that the outcome isn't on you. It's on the one who called you. The pressure isn't to perform. And when you obey, even the impossible begins to bow. Faith doesn't always make sense, but it always makes way. God specializes in showing up where human logic fails. You might not know how he's going to do it, but faith says, I know he will. That faith silences the noise of doubt and tunes your heart to the frequency of divine timing. It reminds you that what you can't see doesn't mean God isn't working. Behind the scenes, he's shifting things, preparing hearts, and aligning moments for your breakthrough. Every bold step you take in faith sends a message to heaven. I trust you more than my fear. And when God sees that kind of faith, he responds with favor. He begins to show you that your obedience wasn't wasted, your tears weren't unseen, and your trust wasn't in vain. When you boldly step out, you don't just change your circumstance, you change your spiritual position. You move from waiting on miracles to our walking in them. Because faith doesn't just move mountains, it moves you into the very center of God's promise. When you boldly step out in faith, you become a living testimony of God's power. People begin to see through your life what it looks like when heaven backs obedience. Faith isn't just personal, it's contagious. Your courage becomes a spark that ignites others. When they see you trusting God in uncertainty, praising him in pain, and walking forward when the path isn't clear, something in their spirit says, if God can do it for them, he can do it for me too. That's why faith is never wasted. It's not only transforming your life, it's planting seeds of belief in the lives of those watching you. You might not realize it, but someone is being strengthened by your steps. Someone who's been afraid to move is gaining courage by watching you move. Someone who's been doubting God's promise is being reminded that he still shows up for those who trust him. That's why the enemy wants you stuck in fear, because your obedience has influence. Your faith carries ripple effects. One act of obedience can change a family, a community, even a generation. When you move, God moves through you. And maybe right now you're wondering, what if I fail? But what if you don't? So what if the very thing you fear is the doorway to the greatest blessing of your life? Faith doesn't promise an easy path. It promises a purposeful one. Even if things don't go the way you expected, you'll discover strength, wisdom, and endurance that comfort could never give you. Failure in faith is still progress in purpose. Because even when you fall, God uses the fall to teach you how to fly. The truth is, the only real failure is not trying. The only real mistake is staying still when God told you to move. He doesn't expect perfection. He expects progress. He honors every small step of trust. You might not see the full result yet, but heaven keeps record of every moment you choose faith over fear, obedience over doubt, and surrender over control. Those choices are writing a story that will one day inspire others to believe again. Every time you take a step in faith, heaven celebrates. Angels are assigned. Paths are cleared. God delights in your courage. He sees you standing on shaky legs but steady belief. And he says, that's my child, walking by faith. Because it's not about how strong you are. It's about how steadfast he is. So don't hold back now. You've come too far to retreat into fear. Step out boldly. Speak with conviction. Move with confidence. Trust that even if you can't see where your foot will land, the ground will meet you when it's supposed to. Because God never lets faith fall flat. He catches it, multiplies it, and uses it to build something bigger than you imagine. When you boldly step out in faith, you not only see what God will do, you become the proof that he still does it. So as we come to the end of this message, I want you to understand something deep in your spirit. Faith is not a one-time act. It's a lifestyle. It's not just for the mountaintops. It's for the valleys too. It's waking up every day and saying, God, I still trust you even when I can't trace you. It's knowing that obedience today builds miracles tomorrow. It's believing that even when the door closes, he's not rejecting you, he's redirecting you. You were never meant to live small, scared, or stuck. God created you to move, to walk by faith, to rise in courage, to believe in what your eyes can't yet see. The world tells you to wait until you're ready, but faith says, move now, and God will make me ready. Don't let fear steal your future. Don't let doubt delay your destiny. You've cried enough. You've waited enough. It's time to step out. To every great story in the Bible started with a step. Abraham stepped out. Moses stepped out. Ruth stepped out. Peter stepped out. And now it's your turn. Heaven is waiting for your movement. God is ready to meet you on the other side of your obedience. You may not see the full picture, but you can trust the painter. He's already written your ending. It's victory. It's breakthrough. It's transformation. This is your moment to step boldly into the unknown. Because that's where God shows up the strongest. You may stumble, but you won't fall. You may tremble, but you won't break. Because when faith is your foundation, no storm can destroy what God is building in you. So lift your head, wipe your tears, straighten your crown. You are not walking alone. He's with you, ahead of you, and within you. Take that step, believe, move again, trust again. And when you do, watch what God will do, because he never fails a faithful heart.